day camp professionals, and welcome back to the Day Camp Podcast. I'm Andy Pritikin, the director of Liberty Lake in the Philadelphia suburbs of New Jersey.
Hi, I'm Sam Thompson from Crystal Lake Park District, northwest of Chicago.
I'm Ehren Gluckstein from Camp Robin Hood, just north of Toronto, Canada.
So we're camp professionals, day camp professionals, joining forces to provide a forum for just day camp people to share ideas and best practices across North America and beyond. And for today's episode, we'll be discussing day camp and inclusion. Day camp inclusion, which is a topic near and dear to all of our hearts. And we have with us a guest host, Sari Grossinger, owner-director of Canadian Camp Robin Hood. Because, Sari, I'm guessing there's probably about 50 Camp Robin Hoods in North America.
We continue to learn more and more about them.
Canadian Camp. How many are in Canada?
There's only one in Canada that we know of.
Really?
Yeah.
You know of. All right, interesting. Oh, that's good. Canadian Camp Robin Hood. All right, so we'll be sharing our thoughts with Sari in a moment, but first, the Day Camp Podcast is brought to you by the friendly and resourceful folks at CRS, Commercial Recreation Specialists, the fine purveyors of the best waterfront, and splash pad products in the world. Check out their website for a mind-blowing list of products at CRS4rec.com. CRS is serious about fun. And this Go Camp Pro podcast is also sponsored in part by the American Camp Association, New York and New Jersey, dedicated to preserving, promoting, and enhancing the quality of the summer camp experience. For camp pros like us, that includes a wide array of professional development like the Tri-State Camp Conference and other smaller conferences that can be found at acanyj.org. Okay, day camp inclusion. On your marks, get set, go. So I started Liberty Lake from scratch in 2002. We had 0 campers. So when you have 0 campers, you become very inclusive and welcoming to all kids by default. And, so I sort of felt like the Statue of Liberty. It was like, give us your poor and your whatever. And they just started piling in, all the kids that were having trouble at other camps. That's what happens when you have a new camp. So we just got into it sort of by default. Now, that was in the early 2000s. Now, in the prior decade, I was a school teacher, and this was in the early 90s. Inclusion was not a big thing in the schools. We had the inclusion kids that we now call inclusion kids were in resource rooms, separate from everybody. And that is what most of us, when I say us, my Generation X and baby boomer friends, this is what we grew up with, right? So when we started taking all these kids with needs, I thought we were doing something special. And I sort of thought that until about the second year we were doing it. And I remember I was down at the fishing dock, and this kid, Jason, who was not even high functioning autistic, I would say lower functioning autistic, he was freaking out and he was hitting himself in the head and making these horrible sounds. And I went up to his advocate and I was like, hey, is everything okay? And she said, yeah, Jason's fine. He's just, his mother told me that, he should get a drink before the activities, and then I shouldn't let him go get a drink in the middle of the activities, because that's what he always has to do. So I'm being firm with him. And I said, okay. And meanwhile, this kid is like screaming, okay, and hitting himself. And I go down to the fishing dock where there's these kids fishing, and I go up to one of them and I'm just like, hey, Jason's really freaking out there, isn't he? And the kid was just like, yeah, he does that, like no big deal. Like, what's the big deal, Andy, And then I started talking to my own children, who at the time were in elementary school. And of course, they're in inclusion classes at that point. And I realized this is all it's going on already in all the schools, right? Kids are used to it. This generation of kids was used to it. But for camp directors who got brought up, in the time that I got brought up, we are not used to it. And I started talking to my camp colleagues and realized that most of them were not doing anything like this. So I reached out to some of my friends that I knew had inclusion programs, like Sari and Howie at Camp Robin Hood, like the folks at the JCC in Medford, which is just down the road from here. That's a separate program, sort of it's like a parallel program. And to my friend Ehren at Round Lake Camp, which is a New Jersey Y camp, which does an inclusion resident camp program, which is pretty cool. And I just started gathering information and figuring out what best to do. And because what happens is once you get successful with this population, they just start coming in droves. And at some point you start feeling like every other phone call is a kid with special needs, because these people are desperate. The typical phone call I have with these people is sort of like, you're the 10th person I've called, nobody wants to take my kid. And then you're just like, oh, we'll give it a try. And they start crying. Like it's a very, very tough thing to be one of these kids' parents. So we got very intentional. We hired a couple of full-time administrators to oversee the program. We developed an intake protocol over the years. Where the kids come to open houses and we separate the parents and the kids and we interview them. There's a long registration part that when they click off on my Camp Minder registration form, do you have an IEP plan or a 504 plan or something like that? A whole new section opens up with specific questions for those people. And then we also ask for sign-offs and information from their school support team. So we work in concert with them, which has been very helpful. Anything we can get to help our team, right? And now, so, 17 years later, 10% of our camp population has some sort of special needs. They don't all need support of a one-on-one or anything like that, but they're on our radar and they get some kind of support from us. And recently I was interviewed by a parent magazine, and I'm just going to finish up with this by saying that they were asking me about LGBTQ kids. And my initial response was, it's all inclusion. Like, we had 29 kids from Shanghai last year that barely spoke English, right? And we got special needs kids, and we got LGBTQ kids. Like, it's all inclusion. We're a camp. Like, we preach like everybody's equal and everybody's beautiful and all that kind of thing. And to rule out any kids because of some kind of challenges that we can actually provide support for, it just seems criminal to me. So that's me. I want to toss the ball to Sari. Sari, I want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what goes on at Robin Hood.
Great. So my background's as an occupational therapist, but I am also a second-generation camp director. So I followed the lead of my parents. We are Camp Robin Hood in Canada, is the oldest privately established day camp, and we've been around since 1946. And it was started with teachers and social workers. And so I think that they had that feeling already that everybody needs to belong. So over the years, they would take an odd child who had different types of needs and help include them in their camp setting. And then my parents took over the camp in 1961. And in 1990, I became an occupational therapist. But before I was an OT, we were already starting to include more and more campers and staff with additional needs. And so we have always said that we wanted to be similar to what's out there in society. So about 10 to 50% of our population are campers and staff with additional needs. And we have also, we have our intake criteria. We've put together a team. So although I'm one of the camp directors and owners, I have somebody who is my right-hand person, and we call our team the Camper Relations Team. And I think it kind of goes back to you, Andy, and how you said that inclusion can be looking at different people from different cultures and making sure that everybody's feeling part of the camp community. And so if we called ourselves the special needs team or something, and we had a child that maybe wasn't yet identified with some of their special needs, or we had even a child that's gifted with different kinds of needs, we want to make sure that everybody's feeling part of our community. And if we were to call a parent and say, we're the special needs group or team, the family would say, well, wait a minute, what's up with my kid? Why are you the one that's calling me? So we're very intentional in using the term Camper Relations Team to help include our campers and staff who have additional needs. And we make sure that our staff training is global. So it isn't just to a small group of people, it's to everybody in our camp, so that we're all coming with the same perspective. And I'll just go to our new logo. We kind of reinvented ourselves a couple of years ago, and we did focus groups, and our families of the 3 pillars that represent Robin Hood, one of the main pillars is actually inclusion. And that came from our families, our campers, our staff that came up with those pillars. So that was pretty telling as well.
That's awesome. It's awesome. All right, cool. Sam, tell us how they do it at Crystal Lake, because I know you've been talking about inclusion ever since I told you we were going to do a podcast.
Yes, one of my favorite subjects. Sari, you brought up a really interesting fact that you will also get parents who don't tell you ahead of time because they've been turned away. So you find out on day one that they need support, or you get those parents who are still in denial. What do you mean that there's something going on? So how you approach it is really important. For our camp, we have about 14% that have diagnoses. With that being said, we have about 40 one-on-one inclusion aids. So we approach it, for me, I interview with inclusion questions in the interview. So nobody works for me who isn't comfortable and isn't in that culture of being inclusive. I'm lucky enough that I have a before and after school program, so I can interview at the school while their kids there. And it's really nice to let the person come in and sit down and see how the kids react to them. And how do they react when my Williams syndrome child hugs them? If they are cringing, that's the end of the interview. You could go home now. So anyway, we work in teams. So it's not just the Andy group, it's the Andy Ehren group. One of them is an inclusion aid, but that's not the way it's addressed to the kids. That way too, they have support from each other. They both know the children, all the children. There's no worry about, hey, I have to go to the bathroom. And then they can tag team and be more effective and more a part of it, I guess.
That's really awesome. I would love to find out what your interview question is that alludes to this kind of thing, because I want to include it in my interview.
Absolutely. We have one scenario where you've got most of your group there and another child is heading towards you and they have leg braces on. And one of your children says, oh, well, they better not be in our group because they look different. How would you handle that? And I actually had a girl cry in the interview
Question.
because she was so disturbed by that being something that could happen. And now 4 years later, she's still with me and she's wonderful. But the way they react to some of those questions, or how would you support them doing this activity? And if they say, well, I'll tell them, I know you can't do as much as they can, you can sit out. And I'm like, no, so it's whether or not they've got the instincts. The other thing about that is a lot of the things that we do with our inclusion kids are good practice for any child, like giving them warnings before a transition, one instruction at a time, having visual cues. All of those things are good with every child. And so we
Absolutely.
approach it that way.
So just to rope Ehren in on this, because I know he told me that he's been at Camp Robin Hood since he was like an infant. So obviously at some point you must have been a counselor with some of these kids in your group, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk about it from a frontline kind of aspect of things?
For sure. I have two things that are really that stick out in my mind as being huge benefits of the inclusion program are the fact that growing up, especially in a school system where kids were segregated that had additional needs, and they weren't part of our everyday experience at school. When being in a camp environment where you're completely integrated, with different kids in your cabin group, it's really a fantastic way to, develop empathy and be able to, relate as you grow up, and you're able to, it's almost second nature to be able to, just make sure that what we're doing, the activity that we're doing, or the approach that we're taking, whether it's walking from one area to the other or whatever the case may be, is always mindful of the that child or the children in the group that have additional needs. So as a child, and I think our parents continue to recognize that as a benefit of the program at Robin Hood. The kids who are in that group, in the groups that are integrated, and most groups at our camp do have kids with additional needs. Parents recognize the importance of that in their kids' development and ability to empathize. So that's an important aspect. And as a staff member and someone maybe who comes into this environment without any real experience, a lot of people do have a desire to work with kids with special needs and additional needs, and it's something that a lot of people, when we recruit staff, a lot of people talk about opportunities to do that, and so they do look for that, and I think having the experience that Sari and her team are able to support the staff and, ensure that the experience is a positive one in 99.9% of the cases that we have here. So the staff leave with with a better understanding and a level of confidence that they didn't have before.
That's true. I think a lot of camps don't understand the benefits to this, right? I think camp directors may think, well, a benefit of, well, you get additional campers, but they don't understand the real benefit that it has to your culture and the extra skills that people learn, and empathy being, of course, the giant one. What I tell all my colleagues about this is that at the end of the summer, after we've had, all these kids at the camp and all these parents that called me and said, I called 10 other places and you're the only one that would take me and all that kind of thing. At the end of the summer, I get just as many thank you emails and cards from the parents of typical kids saying what an unbelievable experience it was for my daughter to have this girl in her group, that she learned so much empathy and it was so great for her to blah, 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 and going on and on and on. So it's not just lip service. It's not just us in our big hearts saying this. This is actually a selling point for our families that we do this.
And these are lifelong learnables. I mean, so you've got these campers that we're supporting that are learning skills that often, as they get older, I will be a reference for them to get into a college program or into a supported work program for during the year. And then they come and work at camp during the summer, but have now a career during the rest of the year too. And then the impact on our staff that we hire that work with our campers, they also have career choices that they may not have even thought they were going to go that route. So it's really exciting.
Anybody getting into education right now that doesn't get an extra certification in special needs is crazy, because that is certainly where a lot of the jobs are.
I love when they change their major after they've had the experience.
Oh yeah, that's the best. So when I talk to other camps about it and they sort of wince, all right, what I've found is the initial wince is that of, are these kids that we're bringing in with problems, right? Are they going to, I'm afraid they're going to negatively impact the typical kid's experience, right? And it's such an old school way of thinking, because these kids are so accustomed to it in their own schools, right? But that, to me, is like the first hurdle that the old guard of camp directors has, right? And like I said, the parents of our typical kids think it's terrific too. But the second thing they tell me, which always comes up, they say, well, these kids that come in with the additional support, right? And we're going to talk about the additional support, because I know, Sari, you train people, and Sam, you probably do to a degree too, and I do. But when they come in from out of, from a school district or whatever, and they come in a third party support team person, right? Camps use that as an excuse of saying, oh, well, who are these people they're bringing in? We don't know who they are, right? Well, you could certainly background check them. You can hire them the same way you hire your own people. They can go to your staff orientations, which they should, right? I mean, we give them staff shirts, right? Because we identify them as regular staff also. And like Sari said, or no, it was Sam, I think, that said it, that you have a group and one of the counselors in the group is one of these additional staff people. Well, to the bulk of the rest of the kids, they're just another staff person in the group anyway, right? So you have to train these people and let them know about this. So those are the two things I hear. I mean, do you ever talk to any other camps about trying to push this idea?
Having the second staff member there, they've got their focus on the child for that extra support when they need it. But yeah, they're completely integrated. And one thing that you brought up earlier when you were talking about benefits, or before that staff are more intentional. That you mentioned the intentionality of how you do this. All your staff are more intentional now in what they do and looking for the tools that each individual child needs. So that's a benefit to the children that you can sell to your parents, is because they're trained so well, they are looking for what's best for your child as well. A quote that I used to always tell my staff was, fair is not always getting the same thing. Fair is getting what you need.
Exactly. That is such a great quote. And I think it's so important that everybody's feeling that, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Keep talking, Sam.
I'll save you. I'll save you. I'll save you. Going back to something Sam also mentioned about training, right? That the extra training that we give our staff is completely transferable to all typical kids too. And not to mention that we're day camps. We have preschoolers, first, second graders. They're all kids that need additional support.
Yes.
Right?
They're just developing their tools, period, for the age group.
Yeah. So, all right. So you have a 12-year-old that acts like a 6-year-old. I mean, it's still the same tools that you need. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Sari and Ehren you can tell they've been doing this for a while, because you can see the intentionality in the language that they use about these kids, right? And about purposely using the phrase additional support. And they've used a couple other things in there too. You could tell the people who have been doing this for a while. And
we're still working on it, like that one-to-one that you talk about. I wish there was another word. I mean, yes, some of those kids need that extra staff that's always with them. But just like Sam was mentioning, they have to be part of a team. Because kids have different personalities, and kids will also in the group will pick up on, why does this camper have that extra staff person? And if that person's called their one-to-one, they feel like they have to hover over that child with the additional needs more so than the other kids. And so you want them to blend in, not just by understanding what our expectations of our staff are, that they're part of our team, but they need to blend in so the other campers aren't saying, like, why does Charlie have this extra person always with him? And the other thing is that the staff need to be able to transfer those skills amongst each other too. And sometimes we interact better with one person than another, and you want to be able to transfer the skills. So if the child's only good with responding to one staff person, that's not transferring their skills. They need to be able to work with a variety of people in their environment, campers and staff.
And I've had to switch inclusion aids sometimes, because sometimes the child will connect way better with one than who we thought they would, or that staff member may be way better with this kind of extra ability and not very good with this one. And so you have to sort that out a little as you go in the beginning.
I think you brought up a good point, Sari, about the terminology for these additional staff people, because when you say a shadow counselor, a one-to-one counselor, right? Even what you call it, an inclusion aid, what you call it, Sam? Is that what you said?
Yes.
It does give these people, especially the young people, it gives them a mental idea of like man-to-man defense, right? And what I tell we're changing the terminology this year. We used advocate for a while because the JCC camp that's been doing this for a while uses that phrase. But now we're going to inclusion counselor. So we're calling them counselors, but they're just inclusion counselors. But what I tell them as for a high functioning kid that they're watching, not a low functioning kid, but for a high functioning kid, I say, you are our counselor in this group. As far as all these other kids are going to see you, you're just another counselor in this group. You just happen to have the same schedule as little Johnny here, okay? And you are not his one-to-one. You are not constantly with him. He's always going to be on your radar screen, but he could be on the other side of the pool of you, okay? And what you are is his safety net. So if he misinterprets something at mini golf and starts getting upset, you're going to jump in there and help clear things up, okay? But you are not his butler. You are not his best friend, because that easily could happen. And that's not what we want. This is an inclusion program. Our goal here is for the kids to be included.
And that's why we always say they're all our kids. And so when we talk to our staff, we say, everybody here, they're all our campers, and we all need to intervene or to a point. I mean, sometimes too, there's a reason why a staff person isn't getting involved at that moment, or there may be strategies that you have to put in place. But so we let our specialists know that. So if they're going to arts and crafts, they know that Johnny's coming with an additional staff, and that Johnny maybe needs to sit at the right at the front near the instructor. Maybe he needs to be the one to show what's being done at the activity. So the specialist has an understanding too that maybe that camper can't sit for a long period of time and needs to take some breaks or be the one that hands out the supplies, etc. So we will give information to our specialists as well to make sure that that child's being included and expectations are appropriate. But also, We talk about giving our staff lanyards. So if there's a child in the group that has that extra one-to-one support, or however we want to refer to it, that there's a lanyard there. So if that staff person who is those bottom eyes, like the one that ultimately is that safety net, if they have to go to the washroom or they have to change after swim, they're going to hand over a lanyard to somebody else to have, so that they now know that they're the bottom line should something come up with that camper. Because we were finding in the past that just tagging somebody in or expecting that they're all working together as a team, sometimes you need that one extra person that is that bottom line, that is that safety net.
Right.
Very sneaky with the
And
lanyard.
sometimes
Very
you'll get
sneaky.
other staff members, especially with the little ones, who think, oh, they're so cute, and they'll try to do everything for them. And it's like, no, they need to do what they can do, because it's important that they have success, just like the other kids. Yeah. So preparation too, like before an activity is important. If you've got an autistic child and you're going to play a game with rules and he might get out, you're going to have to prepare him for that, you know.
Yeah. So following up on something Sari said, I just want to touch on that saying they're all our kids, right? Because it's very, very important to train that, because if I'm a counselor and I'm in charge of this group of kids, and this little boy has his own person, right, that's keeping an eye on him, it's the normal wiring in my head is going to say, I'm going to worry about the other 14 kids because Ehren's got that guy. All right. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens. So we have to constantly be drilling. No, you're still his group leader. You're still in charge of this kid. This kid wants to have a relationship with you just as much as everybody else does. Right.
Exactly. And when you talked about the outside staff coming in some camps saying like, oh my, I can't have an outside person coming in. I think definitely having them come to our training, sending them the contract and what the expectation of our staff are is really important. But what I'll often say to other camp directors is, if a child's needs are so high that I really not sure that one of my in-staff camp, whether they're inclusion worthy or not, of being that extra support, that child may need that extra support that's been with them all year round and really knows them. But then I also have to say to that outside staff person, you know, you're going to be working with people 16 through 20, and you could be intimidating to them because you do this all year round and this is seasonal for them. And so they have to also take on more of a mentoring role so that they're not really spooking the staff that they're working with.
Yep.
Great point.
Part of our training too, it is disability awareness. So those fun activities or the stations that help you see what it would be like to be dyslexic, or see what it would be like to have goggles on and you can't see so well, or, you know, there's a bunch of different ones that you can do just to get the whole staff in. Okay, when you're told this child can't do this, this is how that feels. So they have some idea or perspective of where they're coming from.
That's interesting. I want to talk about levels of support in a second, but one thing I just wanted to touch on is, Sam, you mentioned at the onset, parents in denial, or parents that are not aware, and all that kind of thing. And us as day camp people, we have a much different perspective of this as resident camp people, because resident camp directors are getting kids they're already half formed, right? And parents should be aware at that point if the kid has any additional needs, right? We're getting kids, preschoolers, kindergartners, first graders, right? Where could be the kid's first foray into all day away from the home thing, right? Or first time having to really share things, or, you know, and we as day camp people actually we have to tell the parents sometimes that their kid has some additional needs, right? Because if it's a 5-year-old who's just being incorrigible, and we're doing everything we would normally do and all the levels of support that we would normally do for a regular kid, and that kid can't handle it, right? This might be the first time this parent's heard this information. It's very, very touchy. And us being inclusion camps, we know what it looks like, right? We've seen enough high functioning autism to know what it looks like, or intensive ADHD kind of stuff. That is a touchy thing. My division leaders, my middle management people, some of them are good at that, some of them aren't. Fortunately, I have a social worker on staff who tends to handle those conversations and can talk to the parents about it, because, you know, the knee-jerk reaction from a parent is going to be to deny it. and to not want to be. Although there are many parents nowadays that are very happy to attribute their parenting issues to a diagnosis, right? So it does go both ways.
But we can't make an official diagnosis, but we could be very objective and say, this is what we're observing. And typically we wouldn't necessarily see this. And it, you know, is this a new environment for your child? It just could be that they're getting used to that environment. But the big thing that's happening now is a lot of kids, whether they have a diagnosis or not, with self-regulation issues. And so it's just talking about, you know, are you seeing this in other settings, and giving them some examples of where they might see it, where they hadn't thought about it. And then you're saying, oh, well, now we're the third place that's brought these observations to you. And so what are some of the next steps you might want to do? And obviously you want to make sure that camp's going to be a safe and successful setting for their child and everybody else's kids that are there.
Right. So when we come up, go ahead, Sam.
Sorry. When you get to a critical point where you've been trying and they've given you advice and something's not working, sometimes you may need to sit down with them and iron out, this is my responsibility, this is the parent's responsibility, this is the child's responsibility, so that you can iron out, we're working together. But I can handle this part if you could bring me that his fidget, and if he could, you know, give me this signal when he needs time in his safe area, you know, so the three of you are working together. And because they'll come in thinking right away that you're trying to get rid of them, but really you just want to iron out, how can we make it work?
Right.
And these are very tough conversations, and so in our environment, Sari's the one that you know, that always takes those on, and you know, and most of the time, you know, things end up, or you know, parents, it takes some time to, you know, get accustomed to the information if they have been in denial. But you know, I've spoken to many people who have been, you know, so thankful and so appreciative of the care and concern that Sari has shown, and you know, the process that by which she approached, you know, things from the first, you know, first point of contact until the camper has the support that they need. So you know, it's a great person, and you know, these are the kind of people that become great advocates for our camp down the road.
True. And while we don't diagnose people, like you said, Sari, I think what our social worker tends to do is to recommend that when they get back to school in September, that they go for testing.
Right. And they bring up the situations, like I asked the families, like, please log this information I'm sharing with you. But I also recognize that camp is, well, we don't operate in a vacuum. And so we're putting kids with other kids, different personalities, different staff. You could have a really rainy summer and a child that thunderstorms don't do well with them, etc. So it's making parents aware of that too. And also saying, listen, there's lots of trial and error that happens. And so we need to be in this together as a team to work together and try and problem solve through it. But sometimes for 5 summers, they've had a great experience at your camp. And that 6th summer, something's just not sitting right with them. And it usually becomes when a child can advocate a little bit more for themselves, but maybe then they're becoming even more aggressive, trying to get their needs across. And is our setting them up for the most success, even with all the modifications and accommodations that we're putting in place? Sometimes the child's behavior is telling us something too, where we've got to think out of the box and network with other programs that are around us too, because maybe being outside in a really rainy, awful summer or a really hot summer isn't the best setting for that child at this time. Maybe looking at a different type of program may be better. So it's not like my program can't fit, but.
No, it's very true. And I say this all the time to these parents that, you know, here's this child that is normally in a school setting where maybe they're in a classroom of 5 kids with 3 teachers, right? Indoors, 98% of the time. Right? And now they're coming to me outdoors the entire summer in 100-degree heat, right? How do you really, it's going to be a transition that is going to take for this kid to be successful, if he's going to be successful at all, right? And while typical kids generally have rough first couple of days, like it's almost like a normal thing. It's a whole new environment. They're thrown into this thing. It's going to be a rough first couple of days. Well, think about if this kid's on the autistic spectrum, or if this kid has a learning disability or a physical disability, how much more difficult it's going to be for that child. And that we really need to understand that that's going to happen. and to sort of take it with a grain of salt, and don't call the parents after that first day and be like, oh, your kid had a horrible first day, you know?
And the other children in the group, it's always, you always are trying to figure out how much do I share and how much do I not. For instance, we have several hearing impaired, and we got a new girl partway through the summer into that group, and they forgot to tell her that the one little girl was hearing impaired.
Right.
And so she got mad and kicked the girl in the shins because she thought she was ignoring her. And so some of that you do need to share, that remember to stand in front of her when you're talking to her. She can read your lips, you know, that kind of thing. Or you always have that one camper who is a leader, either for good or for bad. And if he's the one leading the other kids about, we don't want him to play with us, then you need to pull him aside and say, I see that you are a leader and the other kids are following what you're doing. Now think about this. He doesn't have the capacity for what you're trying to make him do. Now, are you going to lead for good or for evil? You know, usually if you talk to them just a little bit and say he's not able to do that thing, but he could do this thing, and that way you can include them, they're usually wonderful. The kids are amazing at going, oh, I just didn't realize. And then 90% of the time, they will lead the rest of the group into including. So.
Yeah, and we do something called like differences sessions, but we try not to do it right from the get-go. I mean, in the circumstance you're talking about, absolutely, I think it's so important, but sometimes it's just saying to the staff too, I'm going to give you the basis of what you need to know, but then the kids are going to ask you questions. And if you answer the questions matter-of-factly, then they're just going to be like, oh, okay, now I understand. When he gets excited, he flaps his hands up and down, or if he's getting too close to me, I can put up my hand and, you know, it's a signal to step 2 steps back, so there's better personal space. So it's the education that can come on, but in a matter-of-fact way, because often I think our kids more and more, I think, our people react like, oh, whoa, he's doing this. And the kids watch how the staff person's reacting to that. And then that creates, because they're their role models, oh, I guess I need to react in this way. But if our staff have a better understanding and are able to be responsive in a calm way, that should help.
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk a little bit about levels of support and how we support these kids. We have 16 and 17-year-old high school kids entering 11th and 12th graders, sort of like entry-level inclusion counselors for the real high-functioning kids that just need an additional hand on the shoulder, make sure they get to the right place kind of thing, right? We have college kids who cost a lot more money, frankly, who would be for those kids who need a little bit more than that, right? We have special ed teachers. We have behaviorists. We have all kinds of variations based on what we feel is going to make this kid successful, right? So when we do the intake, that's part of the thing of what level of support are they going to need, and then we create a summer success plan. And you know, I'm sure you have many kids on your radar who don't necessarily have additional staff, but they're on your radar, right? They're high functioning autistic or whatever, and they can make it through, but they do need additional support, just it's verbal and things like that, right? So for these kids, for any of these kids that are in this program, that are overseen by these people, they create weekly cards for these kids that get given to their group leaders on a weekly basis that summarize the summer success plan without diagnoses, okay? It's just information, it's tools, all right? This child does not respond well to loud noises, okay? So make sure when we're having an assembly, he's off to the side, all right? Nowhere does it say autism, ADHD, anything like that there, okay? We also, I loved Sari's thing about the lanyard for the counselor. Like that kind of stuff, I go bananas for. I love it. Any kind of little helpful things like that. So, you know, when we first started taking all these kids and we had all the, you know, let's be frank about this. The kids with additional staff are easy compared to the ones that don't have additional staff, the ones that are in between that you're aware they have issues and stuff, and you don't know, maybe they need additional staff, maybe they don't. I call them the gray area kids. Like those are way tougher because they look just like anybody else. right? They don't have any additional, there's nobody with a lanyard walking around with that kid. So I remember we had 2 incidents in one summer, one with a kid at mini golf where this kid missed a shot, and the kids he was playing with started laughing at him. And this kid took it like they're making fun of me kind of thing. And he took his mini golf club to somebody, right? And then the same summer we have outdoor laser tag, and the kid, he used up his 9 lives and he had to, die a peaceful death. And he refused to because it wasn't fair because this kid cheated and all that kind of thing. And he's one of these high functioning kids that nobody really knew what his deal was. And the specialist, the school teacher, the phys ed teacher that was running this program made a sarcastic remark towards him, like, stop being such a baby kind of thing. And the kid lost his marbles and ended up hitting somebody with the laser gun. And both of these, the teachers at both of these things said the same thing. If we had just known what this kid's situation was, we would have dealt with it differently, right? So what we did is that we create lists every single week of all the kids, of course, lots of lists. And if any of these kids, if there's any kid that has any kind of, we call it an attention note. Now, it could be that they're allergic to bees, or it doesn't have to be something that's inclusionary, just something that's an attention kind of note, right? They have an asterisk next to their last name. And what that does is refer the program person or the group leader to an additional list, which just has a general thing about it. And we've created categories. C for cognitive, which would be like an autism kind of learning disability kind of thing. S for safety, so they're allergic to something. Like my son was recovering from cancer, he couldn't be in the sun too long, that kind of thing. So we created these little categories that don't have diagnoses tied to them, and it just forces that person to ask for extra information. So the program directors and the division leaders, the unit leaders, they have all the information on these kids. But we then meet with them, really intentionally in the mornings, and if this kid's about to start next week, then we try to get to them before, the week before, and talk about it too. But any kind of little things that we could put in to set these kids up for success, so that the people that are taking care of them, whether it's on the bus, in their group, at a program area, so that they can get a heads up that this kid needs some additional support.
And that's what I was getting at before with the arts and crafts example. So all of our specialists get a list. And so they know when cabin 1 comes from Interboys, that there's a boy that needs to sit up close to the front, that he can't sit for long periods of time. So the same kind of thing. And I think that's where they're all our kids. That pulls it all back together again, where everybody is getting similar information, again, not with diagnoses. But this is the first year, the first like last summer, where I had families asking me to put their kids' diagnoses onto that information sharing. And I said, no, because the continuum is so broad that giving a diagnosis is not usually, it's not enough information. We just need to know what those strategies are that are going to help. What are the strengths? What are some of the limitations? And how can we help that child? What are the triggers? And so there are bus notes that go out, and then there's bus buddies. Like the bus counselors know there's certain kids that ride on their buses that can't be released off the bus unless somebody comes to identify themselves as this child's bus buddy. And then that person takes them down to their unit and waits there until one of the counselors arrives from the group that really knows how to work with that child. That's for a child that needs more support and supervision throughout the day, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add on from a technical standpoint. Sari and her team put in a lot of work to enter diligent notes and to do it in a strategic way, so that we're not revealing we're putting the information in the correct fields, so that when we print up reports that we've created through the database system, it ensures that we're not divulging information that's going to compromise privacy, but we're going to be able to share the correct information that's needed for the buses versus the correct information that's needed when they go to a specialty area versus the counselor. So there's 3 sort of different groups of people that see the information, and it's presented in different ways, but really just typed in once into our database system. So, anyone can do that and have it well organized and prepared.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, in America, we can't put the diagnoses in anyway.
Right.
Breaking the law, right, Sam?
I was going to add to that. We get a lot of our children when they're kindergarten, and then they stay with us through 9th grade. So as they move up with each age group, their counselor does a outcome sheet with them like midsummer and end of the summer. And so before we start camp, whoever's getting that child at the next age group goes over the outcome sheet with the person from the year before, so they know what are they working on, you know, what are their triggers and that type of thing. So really by the time they get to senior camp or to teen camp, so many people know them and know their triggers. And, you know, it's like your mom. Some days, if your neighbor talks to you, you'll listen when you won't listen to your mom. Same thing with your inclusion aid. You just are sick of them some days, and you want somebody else. Somebody else has to tag in. So then the support becomes a lot larger as they get older. For example, last week on a field trip, one of my autistic guys who's 5th grade, he doesn't have an aid anymore because the goal of inclusion is to give them the tools so as they're getting older, they can do more on their own. So he's usually good. He's usually regulates really well now. But it was really loud and he was hungry and he wanted to go play and we're trying to get the rules done. And so he just starts screaming. And his aide happened to be on the other side of the room. Another person who knew him, you know, tried to talk to him, grabbed me. And so then they're used to the fact that if it comes to me, then, you know, we're really trying to work on it. So all I had to do was say, Colton, I see that you're having trouble with the noise. It's so loud. I know you're working on this. What can I do to help you control your situation right now? Do you want to go eat in the other room with me? Do you want, you know, and gave him options. And that was enough to make him take a breath and go, okay, I don't want to go in the other room, so I'm not going to scream anymore. And then this transition will be over quickly. So, you know, having those layers of whoever's closest, you have more people that can jump in that are close by that know the child well enough to help out.
It's awesome. I wanted to throw in there that the JCC in Medford, one thing they do interestingly with their levels of support is they have a lot of high functioning kids and they'll put 2 of them in one group and have one inclusion counselor for that person, which is nice if the group stays together all day. But it's a great way to save costs for your camp or for the parents if they're the ones putting out the extra money for it. We've tried that kind of thing. All right, this is an awesome conversation that could go on for a long time, and I just want to tell the day camps listening in on this that you can do it. It is possible. It just takes hard work and some intentionality. But I mean, come on, you should at least be as good as the school down the street when it comes to this, shouldn't you? And I could tell you, like, you know, something to aspire to is that Liberty Lake, my camp, we are recognized by the state of New Jersey for what we do, and we're the only private camp that can get funding for kids that are in an autism program, basically, you know, a support program called Perform Care. Now, it was a lot of hoops to go through, which my nonprofit friends know all about, red tape and hoops, but which I'm not accustomed to. But we do it, and it enables a lot of kids to be able to come to camp just for a couple of weeks that would have never been able to afford it. And for these parents, man, it's like a respite that, you know, they can't imagine, right? And also the greatest 2 weeks of this child's life for the entire year, by far, right? Again, most of these kids are indoor kids. These kids are sitting at desks and looking at screens, like way more than typical kids even are, and they do it a lot too, right? And for us to be able to get them outside and playing around and playing with typical children, I mean, it's the best thing we could possibly do for them.
That's awesome. And I think all that partnering that goes on, I mean, if we can partner, and I think camps in your own communities, you partner with the different agencies and different professionals that are there, because you should never feel like you're left alone on an island. So your families will start to indicate who they're starting to work with and the different programs that are out there. And you should, as a camp, be able to reach out to those programs, learn more about them, and then try and partner with them so that you're always working together as a team. And then it also makes you aware of where those specialized programs are. So when you're talking to a parent and they're inquiring about camp, you have a little bit more of a background when they're maybe not sharing as much as they possibly should be sharing. And they say, well, we've kind of been involved in this program or whatever. You're more aware of what's out there, and that can help you develop your programs and get the support you might need by bringing those professionals into your setting to help it get to that level. But you said, somebody said they have a social worker that's at their camp. Was that you, Andy?
Yeah, Andy. Yeah.
So because my background's as an occupational therapist, and we don't charge our families for the camper relations team support that we have, and a lot of behavior therapists, special ed teachers, educational assistants, I also, using my OT background, I bring in OT students. So sometimes I have 4 of them that I supervise, and I don't have to pay them. This is their placement for their master's degree. And so there might be camps out there that have different professionals that they can start to draw on. You know, it might not be OTs or social workers that they're potential OTs and social workers, but there could be other professions that they could do some supervision with, and that could help with some of the cost sharing.
Right. In regards to occupational therapists, if you could just help out the neophytes out there, because when I first started hearing occupational therapists, I thought that those were people that were helping them learn occupations. It is far from that.
Well, I mean, it's helping people
but not initially.
Right.
Can you explain what an occupational therapist is?
Sure. I mean, I think it's helping people be as independent as possible in the world. And so work for an adult occupation, right? Play for a child is their work. And so it's helping them get the most or be as independent or successful as they can be. And sometimes it's through rehab because they've had a traumatic brain injury or something that set them back in their development, or sometimes it's because they're not developing at the same rate as their peers. And so it's actually looking at the whole picture. So there could be somebody that has a physical disability, but an occupational therapist would work with the team to make sure that the child in their whole spectrum of their life is getting and being as productive and independent as they possibly can. And if they need supports, figuring out what those supports are going to be. So in a camp setting, families often say to me, well, you're an OT and you have OT students. Why don't you just take my child and do a half an hour of occupational therapy with them? And that could be, working on handwriting or whatever. And I say camp is 100% social, but we're also working on lots of activities of daily living. And so when they're swimming twice a day, it means that we get to work on their dressing skills 4 times at least, because they have to get dressed. And what does that look like when we're having 14, 5, and 6-year-olds getting changed in a little cabin and the staff are supporting them? Maybe that's too overwhelming for them. And so it's looking at the give and take of, well, then maybe they should get changed into, we have a change hut that's closer to the pool, because maybe that child can't tolerate being in wet clothes and having to walk back to their cabin to change, or they can't handle walking on the soggy wet grass because sensory stuff is really causing them those issues. So it's just taking a look at the child as an overall person and helping to figure out how can we get them to those next steps.
If this was the first day of staff orientation, I would be completely jazzed just hearing you say that. That was really awesome. So it's the right thing to do. And when I gave a talk about this about 15 years ago to a bunch of day camp people, and I was with a lawyer, and he was explaining to them that now that camps like ours are doing this successfully, that it's actually incumbent on these other camps to do it, that they can't say they can't anymore, right? There was a period of time where all these kids with diabetes, or in huge influx of kids, with diabetes, and camps are like, well, we can't handle 29 kids in the health center. You're checking their sugar and all that kind of thing. Well, no, you have to. Right? That's the schools are doing it. We have to do it. And it's the same thing with these kids that just need some additional support. All right. If other camps are doing it and schools are doing it, you should be doing it. Or you're going to find yourself on the wrong end of a fight. And certainly the wrong end of history, which is the bigger part for me. All right. So we're going to wrap this part up, and we're going to move on to some less intense things, a little more, some fun things in regards to the day camp program tip of the week. We need some theme music for this, Ehren, because we got to put a little jam right here. All right. The day camp program tip of the week is brought to you by our friends at AM Skyer, the leading insurance broker for the finest camps in America for almost 100 years. AM Skyer has been a strategic partner with summer camps, ready to support any needs arising in PR, legal, health, facility, and more. Experience the AM Skyer difference. They are an awesome group of people. All right. So my program tip of the week is that we do a thing called LARP, live action role play, which for many of you, you're going, what in the world is that? And I refer people to the silly and often profane movie called Role Models, which was a very funny movie about 10 years ago with Paul Rudd. Live action role play is basically 2 teams of people Okay, well, they don't have to get dressed up, or they could get dressed up. It's very like medieval-ish. They have like weapons, like swords, kind of things, except they are PVC pipes um, with padding around them and lots of duct tape and lots of decorations and accoutrements. And the rules are very laid out and concrete. And it's being run at my camp by a very nerdy English professor who takes a lot of pride in this. And he's part of the Renaissance Fair that I run also. So of course, lends itself. And we have like literally like 30 on 30 Braveheart type battles. It's a big giant capture the flag kind of thing. But basically, if I'm coming at Sari with my sword and she's coming at me, okay, if I hit her 9 times on her body, like a cat dies after 9 lives kind of thing, if I hit her 9 times, she has to die a horrible death, like on the ground. Right now, she's not done though, because on her team is a medicine man kind of person who can run out to her and say this 30-second spell. Now, while he's doing this for 30 seconds, he too can get killed too. It's true. So we make it 30 seconds, and then she could come back to life, and then she's back up and part of the team again. Right? It is so much fun. It is the epitome of teamwork, right? Just like capture the flag is, and it's fun and exciting. And in this day and age, it's video games come to life, is what it really is for these kids. And they go bananas for it, and they absolutely love it. So live action role play, LARP, that's fun.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It is. You're up.
All right, I guess I'm up. Mine is an inclusive game that one of my counselors made up called tennis baseball. And you play baseball on the baseball field or wherever you play your baseball, but you play it with a tennis racket and a tennis ball. What this does is people with fine motor problems, anybody, or just us klutzes, anyone can hit the ball because it's a racket, it's huge. And it's a tennis ball because when you hit it, you'll get a home run. It'll fly. What this does too, if you're in full leg braces, it gives you more time to get around the bases. If you're, for our autistic guys, depending on what they're working on, we prepare them ahead of time that it's okay if you get out. Look, this time you hit the ball. Next time you'll make it to first base. The next time, and being ready for the meltdown as he learns, to pace the parking lot with him if he got out. And then say, let's go back for our next turn. And he's right back in there again. So it's a very fun game. We never tell any of the children to hold back or do anything special, but it is amazing to see them make some concessions, bobble the ball. If my guy in braces is on third and he's heading towards home, usually somebody will overthrow it. So it's really fun to see how the kids adapt to it, but they all still love playing it. Everybody at camp, it's a normal weekly thing now.
Tennis baseball, definitely
Tennis
great.
baseball.
All right, Ehren.
Sam, that's a great activity though for a guy like me who has no athletic abilities, and hitting a baseball is not always easy. So I would love to play that sometime. It sounds great. And so for me, just in keeping with our inclusion theme, I wanted to mention an activity that we did a couple times at our sport, or we've done it at our sports camp from time to time. We had the benefit of having an organization, Parasport Ontario, who actually brought wheelchairs to our camp that we could use and play wheelchair basketball. So that was a fantastic experience for the kids that got a chance to do it, and many of the parents actually called afterwards to sort of commend and share their appreciation for how cool it was that we were teaching an inclusive sport to all kids that were able-bodied. So that was great. And so a variation on wheelchair basketball for those people that don't have the wheelchairs or access to them. Just chair basketball and having chairs positioned on the basketball court and in strategic spots, and even letting the kids choose where they want to put their chair. But once they put it down, that it's in that spot, and having a couple of runners on the side that get the ball when it goes out of bounds or out of reach. But just playing basketball in the sort of normal basketball. With the normal basketball rules, but with a chair as your as your variation, and again, teaching kids about differences and being inclusive of everybody.
Can I just jump in on there? Because that actual, when we brought in parasport with the wheelchair basketball, one of our campers that uses a manual chair went home, told his family it was the best thing to watch his peers and how they were having a hard time maneuvering their wheelchairs and getting around. And so he asked his principal at his school to bring parasport to his school. And now that school brings parasport every year, and this kid just beamed from ear to ear. So I just wanted to throw it in.
Awesome.
That was
awesome.
He was
All right, listen, Sari. You have a minute and a half to do this.
Okay.
We're almost out of time.
Okay, very quickly. Mine's more of a pre-camp training and leadership training program. It's actually a poem that I learned at Tri-State years ago. It's called Welcome to Holland, and then there's Welcome to Holland, the sequel. And it was written by somebody who used to write a lot of the Sesame Street Emmy Award-winning programming, and it's just helping to build empathy. And so you think you're going to Italy for a trip, but you end up in Holland, and then being able to recognize all the positives you have in Holland, and talking to your staff about, and to your CITs and LITs about how to be able to make, change your perspective and to appreciate what you have.
Nice.
That's great. So we could Google it and find it, you think?
Yes, you totally can. So Welcome to Holland and Welcome to Holland sequel. And it came from a Tri-State poem called Like Me that Emily Pearl Kingsley wrote.
Awesome. All right. So
we can put a link. We can put a link to it in the notes.
Exactly.
Nice.
We'll get our millennial Ehren on that. All right. So anyway, thanks a lot. We want to thank our executive producer, the Camp Maverick himself, Mr. Camp GoPro, Travis Allison. Thanks for helping us out. Thank you to ACA New York, New Jersey, Commercial Recreation Specialist, and AM Skyer for allowing us to bring this podcast to you. Check out the show notes at daycamppodcast.com. Don't miss an episode of our pod. Subscribe to it through iTunes or however else you get your podcasts. And we will be back real soon with our next awesome topic just for day camp, folks. Thanks so much. Enjoy your winter. Enjoy your holidays. Thanks for listening to the Day Camp Pod.